After their father loses his life, two girls begin to be pursued by a smiling, silent evil entity that is determined to exterminate them. Today we're going to recap the story of the movie, The Jester, from 2023. On Hallows Eve, a man called John is on his way home when he begins to be chased by Jester, a masked entity in an orange suit. On the way, the man sees a child watching him in a dark alley, but decides to just ignore it and keep walking. A few meters ahead, the girl appears again in his path and John closes his eyes as tightly as he can, making the hallucination disappear. Thoughtful, the man picks up a Polaroid photo and it is revealed that the girl he is looking at is actually his daughter. After some time looking at the photograph, John decides to call the girl, who is now an adult. To John's surprise, Emma answers and he takes the opportunity to apologize for everything that happened, without imagining that Jester is right behind him watching. Despite his apology, Emma is still unable to forgive him and is very harsh with John, swearing at him and hanging up on him. As the man cries, Jester appears behind him and touches his shoulder, making John turn around. Realizing the human state, the entity begins to mock him and covers his mouth to stop him talking. Jester then makes a rope appear out of thin air and begins to tighten it around John's neck, making a magic and pulling on his own tie to lift the human into the air. After a few seconds with the rope around his neck, John loses his life and Jester levitates him off the bridge, releasing him from above. The next day, John's funeral takes place and Emma decides to show up, although she avoids contact with everyone else. Unlike her, Jocelyn, the daughter John had with another woman, appears to be much more shaken and welcomes the people who have come to pay their last respects to her father. When they arrive at the funeral, Jocelyn's friends greet their friend and ask about Emma, being surprised that she is attending. Away from everyone, Emma calls her mother and tells her that the funeral is over, as well as telling her that she's spoken to Jocelyn and they've arranged to meet that evening. While talking to her mother, Emma sees Jester dancing beside John's coffin and celebrating in a bizarre way, but he mysteriously disappears as soon as the girl turns around. Behind the trees, Jester watches Emma walk away when two cemetery workers appear and ask him to leave. Instead, the entity sits on a chair and puts its feet on John's coffin, which makes one of the employees take out his cell phone to call the police. As he calls, the other man falls to the ground out of nowhere and hits his head on a rock. Desperate, the colleague speaks to the emergency services and asks for an ambulance to come to his aid. When he approaches his friend to see if he's breathing, the man realizes that his shoelace has been tied and that's why he's fallen. At that moment, the attendant asks where they are so that she can send an ambulance, but before he can answer, the employee starts choking and spitting up blood. Out of nowhere, an apple comes out of the man's mouth and he is eliminated without understanding what has happened. In the evening, Emma goes to meet Jocelyn and sits down next to her to talk. Trying to be friendly, Jocelyn offers her a drink and thanks her for coming, bringing up various subjects to try to keep the conversation pleasant. After many bottles, Jocelyn takes courage and hands Emma an envelope, showing her the photo that was in John's pocket at the moment he supposedly took his life. As soon as she sees the Polaroid, Emma is visibly upset and is extremely rude to her stepsister. Realizing that she doesn't intend to get any closer, Jocelyn asks why Emma came to the funeral and she tells her about the day John abandoned her and her mother. Emma says that she has hated her own father since that day, and that the feeling grew even stronger after discovering that he had married another woman and had a second daughter. Finally, Emma says that she came to the funeral in search of peace when she confirmed that John really was eliminated, but that nothing has changed and she still has the same negative emotions even after seeing the coffin. After the argument, Emma leaves angrily and Jocelyn takes the photo back, leaving the bar rather upset. On the street, Emma is walking home when she meets Jester, who tries to do some magic tricks for her. Headless, Emma ignores it and continues walking, but the entity teleports in front of her and offers her a deck of cards to choose from. Frightened, the woman runs into a nearby convenience store, where she watches the masked man. After some time waiting, Jester leaves and starts walking around the neighborhood, meeting two boys who are picking up some sweets. While the bigger one takes several treats from the pot, the smaller one is more polite and only takes one per house. Seeing this, Jester performs a magic trick on the little one and gives him another sweet as a present, which makes the older one approach him saying that the trick was bad. As a way of punishing the young man, Jester takes his sweets and starts putting them in the younger boy's bag. Wanting to retrieve the treats, the young man tries to take everything back, but Jester stops him by putting his arm inside the bag to hold him back. Frightened, the older boy runs desperately and the younger one follows, leaving their bags behind. At home, Jocelyn finishes handing out sweets to the children and goes to the sofa to watch some old horror movies. Suddenly, the woman notices a silhouette at the window and hears some knocks on the door. Frightened, Jocelyn stares at the silhouette until one of her friends calls out to her, putting her at ease. Inside, the friends start talking about the Halloween festival and one of them asks if Jocelyn doesn't want to go, but the girl used to go with John and refuses the invitation, saying it's not a good idea. In the convenience store, Emma buys a drink and is walking towards the hotel when Jester reappears in front of her. Tired of running away, the girl tries to talk to the stranger, who once again offers her the deck of cards. Even though she finds it strange, Emma picks up a card, memorizes it and puts it back in the deck. The masked magician then shuffles the cards and asks her to take the top one, but Emma is not at all impressed by the trick and walks off in the opposite direction. After a while, Emma realizes that the magician is still behind her and turns to push him, knocking his bottle to the ground. Jester then bends down to pick up a shard of glass and Emma asks if he wants to eliminate her. Unlike what she had imagined, the entity uses the shard of glass to cut its own neck, causing a small amount of blood to spurt out onto her face. While Emma tries to understand what has happened, Jester gets up all stiff and strange. Terrified, Emma runs into an alley trying to escape while Jester walks slowly behind her. At home, Jocelyn talks to her friends about what comes after perishment when Liam tells her not to worry, saying that the cemetery is the end of everything. Upset by what he says, the girl goes to John's old room and sits down on a chair to look at the family photos. While she is reminiscing, John's ghost appears sitting in the armchair behind her, which frightens Jocelyn even more. Thinking she's delirious, the girl goes back to her friends and asks to go to the festival, saying she needs to distract herself somehow. At the site, Jocelyn follows her friends while seeing various things that remind her of her father, such as random people wearing John's clothes and with a rope around their necks. Just then, the group arrives at the haunted forest playground and Jocelyn decides to accompany her friends who are excited. Instead, the group ends up splitting up and Jocelyn ends up in a biome full of ropes, which reminds her of John. Nevertheless, the girl manages to get through the forest and ends up in another part which is full of scary pumpkins. Following the trail, Jocelyn finds a gigantic clown's head and decides to enter through its mouth. Inside, the frightened woman sees her father's legs dangling and begins to go into shock, made even worse when one of her friends sneaks up behind her. Shaken, the girl runs outside and begins to cry, missing her mother and father. Jocelyn regrets, saying that she thought she could still have a family and that's why she tried to get close to Emma, but it didn't work and now she feels totally alone. At the convenience store, Emma arrives bloodied and tries to tell the attendant what she saw, but the man thinks she's delirious from drinking and doesn't believe her. As the woman refuses to leave, the employee calls the police and Emma again tries to explain what she saw, but once again the officers don't believe that a masked man got up after taking his own life. As she tries to explain herself, Emma sees Jester enter the store and walk around until he stops behind the policeman. Upon seeing the masked man, the agents ask him if he has seen Emma before and ask him to remove the costume, but Jester just ignores them and teleports behind the girl. After Emma walks away, the entity takes a handcuff from his pocket and attaches it to his wrist, causing the object to land on the arm of the two policemen. While they try to understand what has happened, Jester stuffs the policeman's head inside his top hat and pulls it back, leaving only the neck empty. Desperate, the other policeman removes the handcuff and shoots in the direction of the monster, who holds the projectile as if it were nothing. Taking advantage of the fact that he's busy, Emma leaves the store and runs through the streets, but Jester soon finishes off the second policeman and goes after her. At the festival, Jocelyn is sitting with her friends when she sees John's ghost passing before her eyes. Tired of running away, the girl gets up and goes after him, leaving Liam alone with Jester. In yet another trick, the entity takes some cups and hides an object under one of them, asking the man to guess where it is. When the stranger has finished, Liam points to the cups in the middle and Jester shows him that the object has changed color, which impresses the man. Continuing the show, Jester lifts the second cup and reveals that several teeth are inside. Suddenly, Liam's entire dental arch disappears and his mouth begins to bleed. While her friend falls victim to the entity, Jocelyn sees John approaching his younger version and stands by watching. At the table, Jester lifts the third cup and reveals that there is another random object underneath. Just when Liam thinks he's got away with it, the entity shows that there's still something stuck inside the cup and slaps the bottom, causing the young man's eyes to fall to the table. Hearing Liam's cries of pain, the girls try to carry him to the exit while calling for Jocelyn to leave, but Jester approaches and breaks the leg of one of them, as well as leaving the other voiceless. As the entity approaches Jocelyn, Emma runs through the streets of the city until she is exhausted, stopping to rest in front of a library. Just then, her mother calls and starts laughing in Emma's face, asking why she's afraid of a court jester. Continuing, the woman says that none of this would be happening if she were friendlier and that's why everyone is moving away. Just then, Jester appears in front of the bookshop and talks to Emma using her mother's voice. Tired of running away, The woman asks what he wants and J3st3r starts talking about Jocelyn, saying that she has tried hard to make the two of them close, but that now it's too late. Confused, Emma asks what J3st3r has done with Jocelyn and the entity tells her that she shouldn't care, since it never wanted to know about her before. More determined, the woman repeats the question and the entity says that she is free to leave without looking back, just like John. J3st3r then says that if she does this, Jocelyn will soon be forgotten and Emma will be able to live her life in peace, but says that if she wants to continue playing, she must go all the way. Determined, Emma says she won't leave without Jocelyn and J3st3r congratulates her on her choice, saying that she has finally learned something new. While the entity laughs, Emma sees John's spirit on the bridge where he threw himself and runs over to talk to him. Desperate, the girl begs him not to do this and asks to talk, but John replies that he tried to talk that night and was rejected. Still with the rope around his neck, the spirit tells her that she is to blame for his elimination and that everything could be different if she had agreed to talk. Repentant, Emma asks for forgiveness and calls John her father for the first time, but the man continues to blame her and puts the noose around her neck. Suddenly, the object starts to move on its own and drags Emma off the bridge, causing her to fall alone in the middle of the cemetery. On the spot, Emma calls for her sister and finds the small version of Jocelyn lost in the forest. As she doesn't recognize her, the girl asks if she has seen her father and says that she was abandoned there, but Emma soon realizes that this is not an illusion and continues looking for her sister. As the woman walks away, little Jocelyn claims that she is the real daughter and that Emma is just a make-believe, but the woman manages to resist her taunts and continues walking in search of the real Jocelyn. A few meters ahead, Emma sees John and little Jocelyn entering a strange building and decides to go after them, finding the two of them happily carving pumpkins for Halloween. Seeing his eldest daughter, John says that he never wanted Emma and that she was just a mistake. With a knife in his hand, the man approaches his daughter and says that he was never able to be happy because of her, claiming that even if he had a new family, the memory that Emma existed was enough to take away his happiness. At that moment, John points the knife at his own chest and sticks the blade in all the way. Seeing Emma cry, the man asks why she is doing this and says that his elimination should make her happy. John then asks her if she feels guilty and says that Emma will have to live with this for the rest of her life. Not knowing what to do, the woman asks for Jocelyn's help, who approaches her to mock her, saying she feels sorry for her and mentioning how pathetic she looked at the funeral. Closer up, Jocelyn takes the knife to John's chest and says that Emma had the chance to put things right and wasted it, saying that she is a burden to everyone around her. Finally, Jocelyn says that she doesn't want to have to live with Emma and hands her the knife to take her life, saying that it would be her last act of kindness to the world. With the blade in her hands, Emma begins to cry until she remembers that none of this is real and plunges the knife into Jocelyn's stomach. At that moment, the illusion is broken and Emma realizes that she has pierced Jocelyn for real, causing her to fall to the ground as she struggles to stay alive. While trying to help Jocelyn, J3st3r approaches and Emma takes the opportunity to strike several knife blows to the entity's heart, saying that he is a disease. Calmer, Emma tells J3st3r that she won't run away anymore and that he can do whatever he wants with her, as long as he leaves Jocelyn alone. Instead, the entity just walks away and leaves the two alone to get help. Sometime later, Emma is in the cemetery talking to her mother and says she's thinking of spending a few days with her when she gets back from her trip. After arranging everything, Emma ends the call and stops in front of John's gravestone, apologizing for everything and saying that she should have talked to him that night. Despite this, the girl says she is not to blame for his elimination and claims that John made his own choices. In the end, Emma says that she wishes they had gotten along well, but that despite everything, they still have the same blood. She then says that she will carry this burden until the end, but that she will not make the same mistakes and will move on with Jocelyn.
The movie, set in the bustling heart of Brazil, introduces us to the intricate dynamics of a restaurant's staff. The story primarily unfolds within the walls of this establishment, owned by Inácio, a man in his mid-30s whose manner radiates authority and self-centeredness. Inácio's primary concern is the success and reputation of his restaurant, often at the expense of the well-being and needs of his employees. Inácio's management style is both demanding and uncompromising, frequently requiring his staff to work extended hours, often late into the night, to ensure the restaurant operates flawlessly. This relentless work ethic creates a tense atmosphere among the employees, who find themselves in a constant state of frustration and exhaustion due to Inácio's insatiable demands. Among these employees is Sarah, a dedicated and hardworking waitress who approaches her job with a level of professionalism and grace that belies the challenging conditions under which she works. Despite the long hours and the demanding nature of her boss, Sarah, along with her colleagues, strives to maintain a high standard of service. They are the unsung heroes of the restaurant, serving customers with unwavering smiles and an enduring commitment to excellence, all while struggling to make ends meet in their personal lives. One particularly grueling evening, as the restaurant nears its closing time, Sarah encounters an aloof customer dining alone. After serving him, she returns to the counter, where Ignazio is observing the scene. Ignazio, in a rare moment of reflection, expresses pity for the solitary diner, but his comment only serves to remind Sarah and her colleagues of their impending release from the night's duties. As the night progresses, the toll of the grueling shift becomes increasingly evident on Sarah. Physical exhaustion sets in, her feet are sore, her back aches, and keeping her eyes open becomes a Herculean effort. Yet, despite these challenges, Sarah remains resolute. She is determined to persevere through the final hours of her shift, driven by the promise of rest and the comfort of her home, which awaits her at the end of this long and arduous night. The tension escalates as the evening progresses in a Brazilian restaurant. As the night wears on, the energy of the staff visibly diminishes, all except for Ignazio, the restaurant's owner. Ignazio mingles with the patrons, sharing with them his anticipation of a special guest arriving the next day, a journalist. He emphasizes the importance of this visit, instructing his team to pay meticulous attention to every detail, from the dining area to the bathroom. In a quiet moment, Ignazio retreats to the restroom to rehearse his speech for the upcoming interview, a conversation he continues over the phone with his wife. When he emerges, he notices Jair, the main chef, casting a stern glance in his direction. Ignazio chooses to ignore this and turns his attention to a new group of customers entering the restaurant. These newcomers, evidently a couple, are greeted by Sarah, who promptly takes their order. The chef, visibly annoyed by the late arrival of these guests, reluctantly accepts the order from Sarah. Meanwhile, Ignazio engages in conversation with one of the new patrons, Veronica. They discuss various topics, including food and their favorite wines. During this exchange, it becomes apparent that Sarah and Veronica do not get along, but Sarah continues to serve them despite the tension. As the night draws closer to its curfew, an unexpected and harrowing event disrupts the calm of the restaurant. Two masked intruders suddenly burst in, wielding a gun and demanding money. The sudden intrusion paralyzes the patrons and staff with fear. One of the robbers aggressively grabs Veronica, handling her roughly and threateningly. His partner, however, attempts to defuse the situation, urging him to stay focused on their primary goal. In a startling turn of events, Ignazio emerges, holding what appears to be a gun, and confronts the robbers, demanding their surrender. In the heat of the moment, he fires a shot, revealing that his weapon is nothing but a toy. However, the chaos has already escalated beyond control. The shot, although from a toy gun, inadvertently strikes one of the intruders, causing him to fall, writhing in pain from a wound in his belly. This unexpected twist intensifies the already tense atmosphere, plunging the restaurant into a state of turmoil and panic. Soon after, the unfolding events at a Brazilian restaurant take a dramatic turn, leaving both patrons and staff in a state of shock and apprehension. The unexpected outbreak of violence within the once tranquil setting throws everyone into a state of heightened anxiety as fear and uncertainty permeate the air. The serene atmosphere of the restaurant is replaced by a palpable tension, as everyone struggles to come to terms with the harrowing situation unfolding around them. Amidst this chaos, a customer, who had been quietly observing the staff, particularly Sarah, becomes increasingly interested in her. He is intrigued by her mysterious air and the purposeful way she navigates the restaurant. His attention is drawn to her interactions with Ignazio, the restaurant owner, sensing that she may be involved in something significant. Motivated by curiosity and a desire to help, he decides to approach Sarah, hoping to gain her trust and offer his support. However, Sarah is not easily swayed. She is driven by her own objectives and understands that Ignazio is crucial to her continued presence in the restaurant. Her plans are solely her own, and she is not looking to collaborate with outsiders. When the customer reveals his identity as a police officer, Sarah's suspicions are heightened, confirming her belief that he could not be trusted. Reacting swiftly, Sarah confronts Ignazio, divulging everything she knows. Ignazio listens intently, his expression growing increasingly stern as the story unfolds. Upon learning of the customer's profession as a cop, Ignazio realizes the potential threat to his establishment. Without wasting a moment, he grabs some plastic and approaches the customer's table. Caught completely off guard, the customer can only watch in horror as Ignazio binds him with the plastic, his eyes reflecting sheer terror. Ignazio, showing no mercy, understands the gravity of the situation. He perceives the customer as a potential menace to his business and is determined to eliminate any risk. Ignazio instructs Sarah to escort the bound customer to the kitchen, where he is to be kept with the others, further escalating the already tense and unpredictable situation within the restaurant. The dynamics within the Brazilian restaurant take a darker turn as the plot thickens. Following the intense events of the night, Sarah finds herself increasingly under the control of Ignazio, the restaurant owner. She becomes similar to a puppet, complying with his every demand. Aware of the dire consequences of disobedience, particularly after witnessing the fate of the other captives in the kitchen, Sarah treads carefully. Ignazio, consumed by suspicion, becomes convinced that Jair, his head chef, is the mastermind behind the robbery. His conviction is fueled by the recent odd behavior and intense stares he has noticed from Jair, leading him to believe that not all is as it seems. As time progresses, Ignazio's paranoia intensifies. He scrutinizes everyone in the restaurant, including Sarah, with an eagle eye. However, Sarah is not only observant but also cunning. She expertly plays along with Ignazio's demands, outwardly appearing submissive and compliant. Yet beneath this facade, she is calculating and strategizing, intent on uncovering the truth that lurks within the walls of the restaurant. Meanwhile, amidst the chaos, the captives are put into a single room, and efforts are made to tidy up the disrupted spaces. Victoria, another character in this intricate plot, requests to use the bathroom. Sarah obliges, taking her there. However, once inside, Victoria insists on privacy, prompting Sarah to leave. During this time, Sarah and Ignazio engage in a conversation outside. The tranquility is abruptly broken by a noise emerging from the bathroom. Sarah, responding to the sound, opens the door for Victoria. In a twist of events, Victoria, having freed herself from her restraints, seizes this moment to attack Sarah and attempt an escape. But her moment of liberation is fleeting as she finds herself confronted by Ignazio, who menacingly points a gun at her. Faced with this new threat, Victoria, though initially stunned, quickly regains her composure. She boldly assesses the situation, concluding that Ignazio is unlikely to pull the trigger. With this realization, she courageously continues her path forward, determined to find a way out of the perilous situation she finds herself in. This confrontation marks another intense moment in the unfolding drama within the restaurant, highlighting the characters' desperation, courage, and the unpredictable nature of their circumstances. The plot reaches a climactic and distressing moment when Victoria's boyfriend, witnessing the unfolding horror, hears a gunshot and is struck by a devastating realization. He understands, with a heart weighed down by sorrow, that Ignazio has claimed Victoria's life. The agony of his loss echoes through the restaurant as he cries out her name, a mix of despair and disbelief in his voice. In the midst of this chaos, Sarah stands, momentarily paralyzed by the shock of what she has just seen. Despite the traumatic scene playing out before her, she somehow finds the strength to regain her composure, acting as though nothing out of the ordinary has happened. Ignazio, on the other hand, maintains a chillingly calm manner, displaying a disturbing lack of remorse for the lives he has taken. The plot takes a bizarre turn as Sarah, seemingly under the influence of an unknown force, begins to exhibit increasingly strange behavior. Ignazio instructs her to move Veronica's body, and she complies, dragging it to another room. After examining Veronica's lifeless form, Sarah emerges from the room transformed, her hairstyle altered and now dressed in Veronica's clothes. In a surreal twist, she begins to flirt with Ignazio, and he reciprocally responds with a kiss, drawn into her strange allure. Meanwhile, The tension mounts as the other captives desperately try to escape their confinement. They struggle to free themselves from the plaster restraints, their efforts marked by a growing sense of urgency. J3r, overwhelmed by fear and frustration, lashes out with insults at Sarah when she enters the room to carry out Ignazio's orders. Sarah, displaying a cold and unwavering resolve, forcefully drags J3r and the remaining robber out of the room. She commands them to sit on chairs, their hands still bound, asserting control over the situation. The tension escalates as Ignazio confronts one of the robbers. Ignazio's anger boils over as he demands to know who the accomplice is. The robber, under immense pressure, accuses Sarah of being his partner in crime. Ignazio, momentarily puzzled, glances at Sarah but sees nothing to confirm the robber's claim. His attention returns to the robber, his anger manifesting in a chilling act as he brandishes a knife. Sarah, a bystander in this unfolding horror, watches in disbelief and horror as Ignazio brutally slits the robber's throat. The gruesome scene overwhelms her, driving her to the bathroom where she succumbs to nausea. Meanwhile, Ignazio, undisturbed by the violence he has just inflicted, releases J3r, maintaining his eerily calm manner. The atmosphere in the restaurant is filled with tension and fear. Victoria's boyfriend, still restrained and powerless, witnesses the nightmare escalating around him. The reality of their situation is grim and fraught with danger, as the survivors grapple with the increasing violence. In this dire scenario, only 3 hostages remain. Ignazio, who initially feared involving the police for a single death, now finds himself responsible for 3. One of the hostages, a previously aloof man, decides to use his past skills to attempt a mental manipulation on Ignazio. He approaches Ignazio with a calculated calmness, trying to psychologically compel him to surrender. However, Ignazio is not easily swayed and responds with a gunshot, further cementing the sense of hopelessness among the remaining hostages, J3r and Magno, Veronica's boyfriend. Sarah, meanwhile, is in front of a mirror when Ignazio enters. He tells her he has something to show her, and as they leave the room together, she secretly arms herself with his gun. In a tense moment, she points the gun at Ignazio, but in a twist of events, he manages to disarm her, taking their twisted relationship to another level. In the climactic moments of the story, the tension reaches a fever pitch in the Brazilian restaurant setting. Sarah, after briefly retreating to the bathroom, returns to find Magno seated in a chair that has become a symbol of death for many that evening. In a chilling turn of events, Ignazio hands Sarah a gun and instructs her to continue the cycle of violence. Faced with the daunting task, Sarah hesitantly accepts the gun and aims it at Magno, who sits in fear, praying for his life. Despite her efforts to follow through with Ignazio's demand, Sarah finds herself unable to commit the act. In a moment of defiance, she turns the gun towards Ignazio instead. Ignazio is taken aback by her betrayal, standing in shock as she pulls the trigger. However, the gun is empty, a cruel trick by Ignazio. Seizing the opportunity, he overpowers Sarah, forcing her to the ground. Ignazio then coldly executes Magno. The violence escalates further as Ignazio brutally stabs Sarah in the stomach and then moves towards J3r, who is in another room. As the movie draws towards its conclusion, J3r manages to free himself and leaves the restaurant, seemingly abandoning Ignazio inside. However, he soon returns, calling out for Sarah and retrieving something necessary. In the final scenes, a dramatic and harrowing sequence unfolds. Sarah, wounded but alive, enters the room where Ignazio lies. She approaches him and, in a disturbing display of affection, lies beside him. Then, with a grim resolve, she heads to the kitchen and returns with a knife in hand. In a shocking act of retribution, Sarah stabs Ignazio multiple times. The film concludes with a haunting image of Sarah, naked and bloodied, cooking in the kitchen, encapsulating the film's themes of violence, betrayal, and the complex nature of human emotions in extreme circumstances. Did this story spook you out? Let us know in the comments below. For more horror movie recaps, subscribe to our channel and we will see you in the next one. Fear awaits you.
The movie begins with a girl named Heather. She is sitting alone in her dimly lit room, watching a movie. The only light that illuminates the room is that of the moon, streaming in from the window overlooking the full moon. Heather looks exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes. As she sits there in a trance, blood starts streaming down her nose. The TV screen goes static, and she crawls away from the moonlight, looking all disoriented with her eyes strangely twinkling in the dark. Her mother calls out to her, but gets no reply, so she comes inside her room and finds it deserted. She sees the full moon from the window, and all of a sudden starts to panic. In the same panicked state, she rushes out into the deep snow and keeps calling out to her daughter. As she is looking around, her husband arrives, rushing towards her and telling her to go back inside. Just then, a ferocious beast attacks her from behind, and the scene goes black. Fast forward to the present day, we see Heather, who is exercising in her room. All around, there are posters of muscled women flexing their bodies. Amidst all this, there are ominous handcuffs lying on her bed and a book about werewolves hinting at a dark secret. After exercising, Heather goes out and gets her mother into bed. While she is changing her clothes, we see the now healed scars of the previous wolf attack. Later, we see Heather and her dad in her school, where they are caught up in the excitement of a hockey match, cheering on her younger brother as he takes to the ice. After the final buzzer sounds, they head to the locker room. Heather congratulates her brothers for a good match. As they are talking, the hockey coach enters. This rude man immediately starts getting angry at the poor girl, and soon kicks her out for reasons unknown. The poor girl barely manages to ask him to let her try out for the adult team, but the man, without so much as a thought, tells her no. Back at home, Heather and her two little brothers are watching a wrestling show when their mother comes in and tells them that it is time for bed. The boys go off to sleep, while Heather is roped into a mundane task by her mother to go fetch some cigarettes and alcohol. After hesitating for a moment, the girl relents and goes to the store. It's during this dull chore that Heather's path crosses with Jonine. She is grabbing 2 cans of beer and mischievously stuffing them inside her bag. Heather is amused by her shoplifting antics, but doesn't inform the shopkeeper. While looking at her, she mistakenly drops the bottle of liquor that she holds, inadvertently aiding in Jonine's escape. After buying her mother's goods, she comes out to find Jonine with her boyfriend, drinking the beer that she just stole. They drive off, with her passing a fleeting smile to Heather, making the latter quite pleased. The next day, at the ice skating rink where Heather works, Jonine reappears. There they greet and talk to each other for the first time. Jonine asks if she works there and tells her that she just changed her practice center to here. Their conversation is cut short by the arrival of the coach, who takes Jonine away for her warm-up. Heather also watches her skate from afar. There, she notices the poor girl facing a hard time. Later, Heather finds her crying and smoking alone outside. Feeling sad for Jonine, she goes to sit beside her. There, she finds out that Jonine doesn't have a very good relationship with her father, who happens to be her coach as well. It turns out, after a bad practice session, he left her there and went back home alone. Feeling sorry for the girl, Heather offers to get her a drink. They go to the storeroom where they have a few cans of beer and discuss how Jonine got her name. Soon, before things begin to heat up, Heather's nose starts to bleed, cutting their drinking party short. Returning home, Heather finds her dad standing outside, waiting on her. He gives her a sobering warning about her curfew time. Inside, he tells her that she should be careful around this time of the month when the moon is full. She apologizes and promises not to repeat her mistake again. She then asks her father not to tell her mother about this. He looks at her and promises to keep her secret. As he is talking, all of a sudden, his eyes change color, turning eerie like an animal. After he goes out, Heather grabs the handcuffs. She shackles herself in them and prepares to go off to sleep. Just then, her father opens the door and bids her a good night. He then shuts and locks the door from outside, as if Heather poses a threat to them. The following morning, Heather wakes up early and engages in some ice hockey practice. As the family gathers around the TV later, they hear the news about an upcoming lunar eclipse. The atmosphere suddenly turns tense as Heather's mother worriedly looks at her daughter. Heather looks stressed too. Afterwards, the siblings go off to play ice hockey, where their father observes them happily. Spending a cheerful day together, the family returns home for dinner. That evening, Jonine calls Heather's landline. The girl is ecstatic to hear that Jonine has reached out to her. As she happily answers the call, the girl on the other side urges her for a night out together. She is initially reluctant. She constantly looks out at the full moon and contemplates her choices. But after she hears Jonine say that she wants to see her, she throws all caution to the wind. Excited by the prospect of a night out, Heather borrows her dad's jacket, only to receive a cutting remark from her mother about her appearance. She then tells her that she can't go out as the time is not right. But her daughter begs her to let her go, as she would be back before midnight. In a weak moment, her mom expresses her disappointment, longing for the closeness they once shared. Yet, despite the tension, she hands Heather her watch. It is a symbol of trust and sets a curfew of midnight. Finally, feeling happy and eager to meet Jonine, Heather eagerly rushes out. After buying booze, she hops into the car with Jonine and her crew, setting off for a night at the casino. On the way there, the group pops some pills, heightening their sense of adventure. They finally reach the casino, where Heather finds everything deafeningly loud. Inside the bustling atmosphere, Heather finds herself spiraling into a bad state, while Otto gets into a fight after losing at a game. He is thrown out, after which he approaches a worried and tripping Heather. The woman looks at her arms that have grown animal-like hairs and quickly covers them reflexively. In the same tipsy state, she approaches Jonine, who is losing herself in the rhythm of the music, dancing without a care. Suddenly, the shrill sound of her alarm pierces through the haze, signaling the impending curfew. It is almost midnight. Panic grips Heather as she realizes the urgency of the situation. She tells Otto and Jonine that they have to go back as she is late, but the couple laugh it off. Who goes back home before midnight while out partying? She understands that the two have no plan of going back whatsoever. Thus, she rushes off. On the way back, her stomach churns violently as she vomits blood. Her eyes also change color as if any minute she would transform into an entirely different being. With a sense of desperation, Heather groans out in frustration and runs, her legs carrying her frantically through the night. The cold air stings her lungs as she races home, her mind clouded with fear and desperation. The scene shifts, revealing Heather's mother, who is anxiously and almost fearfully waiting for her daughter's return. Back in the snowy woods, we see the poor girl fall into the snow, her body almost battered and broken. The next morning, Heather's mother discovers her daughter at the front door, and shivering, wrapped in a thin blanket. Bruises mark her shivering, cold body. She rushes towards the girl and drags her inside, putting her to bed. Later, after she wakes up, Heather finds her mother crying and vomiting in the washroom. As she gingerly approaches, the woman lashes out at her to get away. Afterwards, Heather goes to her part-time job, where she runs into Jonine once more. When the girl inquires about the bruise on her face, Heather deflects the question, telling her that it is just something she got from falling over on ice. As they are talking, their conversation is cut short by the arrival of Rick, Jonine's boyfriend. It seems the woman was waiting for him out in the cold, while he was taking his sweet time coming over. Such a nice man. As she gets up to go, Jonine expresses her desire to spend more time with Heather. Back at home, Henry's concern for Heather's well-being spills over as he admonishes her about the dangers of wandering the night freely. His worry etches deep in his voice. Heather, feeling the weight of her father's words, lashes out in frustration, imploring him to understand her perspective. For years, she has lived under the suffocating confines of her parents' strict curfew, a barrier that denies her the freedom enjoyed by her peers. She longs to embrace life's pleasures without the looming constraints of her room and the chains that bind her. That night, she dreams of Jonine. Not a very respectful dream either. It seems she has caught feelings for the girl. The next day, she invites the girl to visit her home. Jonine arrives and is amused by the funny interaction among her father and little brothers. As the boys and her father go away, Jonine notices scratch marks all around the furniture and wonders if they have a dog around the house. As they are walking around the house, their conversation is cut short by Patty's interruption. The older woman creates a scene, speaking harshly to Jonine and cautioning her to leave. Patty's words cut deep, as she asserts that she doesn't truly understand Heather. The two then decide to go and spend time alone in Heather's car. There she tells Jonine how her mother is mostly like this. She would get drunk and wasted, and then pass out somewhere inside the house. The next day, amidst all the chaos, a glimmer of hope emerges for Heather as she receives some much-needed good news. The coach has finally granted her permission to try out for the hockey team's selection trials next week. Later, as she spends more time with her, Heather finds herself increasingly drawn to Jonine, forging a deep bond with her. Her feelings increase and multiply as she indulges in fantasies of a life together. She watches her show and cheers for Jonine. The next day, Jonine accompanies her to watch her brother's hockey match. Their cheerful day turns gloomy when Patty once more invades their good time and starts throwing a tantrum. As her drunk behavior starts getting out of control, Henry quickly grabs her and takes her back home. Jonine feels bad for poor Heather and accompanies her back home, even comforting her as she tries to sleep through the shouts and fights in her house. The next day, in the ice hockey rink, Heather finds Jonine with her boyfriend. Despite her longing, Heather is tormented by the knowledge that Jonine is in a relationship with Rick, a man who is controlling and fails to appreciate her worth. She finds the two arguing and approaches the girl to quell their fight, but to no avail. As she goes to trials with her mind filled with thoughts of Jonine, her entire gameplay gets messed up. Sad and defeated, she rushes back home. There, she gets a call from Jonine who asks about the trials. However, Heather is just too sad to speak about it yet. Thus, they decide to meet and cheer each other up. Heather picks her up, and they play around drinking. Jonine's feelings for Heather gradually begin to blossom, and they find solace and comfort in each other's company. After drinking, they go to a bar to party with their friends. As their closeness deepens, they give in to their desires, unable to resist the pull of their mutual attraction. Yet, Heather's newfound happiness is short-lived when, unbeknownst to her, her brothers discover her relationship with Jonine. The next day, as she goes to practice with them, their disdain is quite visible, yet the woman doesn't know why they are acting like that. Feeling the weight of their judgment, Heather's distress is compounded when even Jonine begins to distance herself from her, leaving her desperate and alone. Despite her efforts to reach out to Jonine, all of Heather's attempts are met with silence. Even a visit to Jonine's house proves futile, as her father coldly turns her away, refusing to entertain her questions or provide any solace. With her eyes tearing up and her world crumbling around her, Heather rushes back home. There she tries to busy herself with her workout, as she is left to confront the painful reality of her shattered dreams. Henry notices his daughter's turmoil and decides to step up. That night, he comes into Heather's room, asking if she is all right. To lighten up her mood, he tells her that she is very precious, so whoever is doing all this to her just doesn't deserve her. Then he takes her outside to appreciate the moon. As they are watching it, her father turns around and says how the moon holds so much power over them. When he was a kid, he used to want to rip that moon out of the sky. He once wanted to be all alone too, but then he could not bring himself to stay away from Heather's mother. He sighs and tells her how lucky he is now to have them all. The man looks at his tearful daughter and tells her to remain strong. Someday, someone would come along who is going to accept all of Heather, including the good and the bad parts. After making sure that his daughter's mood is a bit better, the duo decides to retire to bed for the night. Back in her room, Heather thinks back on the night she spent with Jonine. The night all of her dreams crumbled. She remembers how intimate they were when all of a sudden, her body had begun to transform. Her pupils had changed color, and her teeth had elongated into fangs. A strange, blurry image of a beast materializes in her memory, with the voice of a scared Jonine calling out, asking what she is. Tears start streaming down her face as Heather recalls all this, and she starts sobbing. The next day, however, despite everything, Heather refuses to give up and decides to keep trying. After persistent attempts, she finally manages to reach Jonine on the phone. They awkwardly greet each other and ask how they have been doing. After contemplating for a while, Heather extends an invitation to hang out. To her surprise, Jonine reveals that she can't go out with her since she would be going to a party at Rick's house. Heather's heart stings, yet she clamps down on her feelings. After a moment, Jonine invites her to join them at the party. Despite her initial hesitation, Heather decides to attend, eager to salvage their connection. That night, Heather makes her way to Rick's house. Upon arriving at the party, she finds a scared Jonine sitting beside Rick. She does not look happy at all. Seeing Heather, Rick's mood turns sour, and he swears. The girl ignores him and approaches Jonine, asking how she is, but she is sadly met with a cold shoulder from the latter. She averts her eyes, unable to look at Heather. Despite the tears welling in her eyes, betraying her true feelings of hurt and confusion, she seems distant and disinterested. The group engages in conversation, talking about this and that. They look at Jonine and muse that her mother must be hot. She snaps at them, saying that her mother has already passed away. Then, in the same flippant tone, she tells them about how Heather's mother is a drunkard. She shares the vulnerable yet disturbing stories that Heather had trusted her with. This hits poor Heather hard. Hurriedly, Heather leaves the party and goes to sit alone outside. After a while, with a tear-streaked face, Jonine also comes out. She tells Heather that she is not gay, thus Heather should just get over her and move on. As Heather is processing her words, Rick comes out and urgently ushers the scared Jonine back inside. When the girl goes in, he slams the door shut in Heather's face. Back at home, the sense of heartbreak and betrayal weighs heavily on Heather, leaving her shattered and lost. She cries miserably, thinking what must have gone wrong and where. Her mother hears her crying out in misery and comes in to console her. After a while of struggle and thrashing around, she finally manages to calm her daughter down. She then goes out to breathe fresh air under the night sky. Later, Heather is out with her father in his workplace. As she grapples with Jonine's sudden distance, all of a sudden, a far more devastating blow strikes her life. Her father collapses, suffers a heart attack, and tragically passes away, leaving Heather and her family reeling in grief. Henry had been the pillar of strength in her life, and his loss feels insurmountable. That night, the family holds a small funeral. Turns out, after passing, Henry had transformed into a lycanthrope. Heather is racked with guilt as she carries the body and lies it down near a bonfire that they have created. The family is all gathered around the fire and are mourning their father's demise. Patty calls the boys over to say their final goodbyes to their father. Afterwards, they throw the body into the bonfire and burn it to ashes. Henry's demise fundamentally changes Heather, plunging her into a sea of bitterness and resentment. She grapples with overwhelming loneliness, feeling as though the world has turned its back on her in her darkest hour. After the funeral, Heather heads to the washroom and, in a fit of rage, cuts off her hair. All of a sudden, blood starts to drip down her nose. As she comes out into the living room, her brothers are shocked to see the change. Adding to her anguish, Heather's brothers begin to point fingers at her, blaming her for their father's untimely demise. Her brother calls her a heartless woman. He says that their father must have found out about her little affair, and the shock must have taken his life. The accusations deepen Heather's pain and isolation, leaving her feeling abandoned and betrayed. Angry, the girl slaps her brother. Soon the boys get into a fight, and chaos ensues. Patty hears the noise and rushes out to find her children fighting. She attempts to calm her sons. Heather takes this moment and runs out to breathe fresh air. Patty calls out from behind, asking her to stop, but the girl doesn't listen. She quickly runs out, unaware of the impending danger lurking in the shadows. The moon is full in all its glory. Soon it starts to get red. It turns out, today is the eclipse that was predicted in the news a few weeks back. Not knowing, or perhaps knowingly ignoring the consequences, Heather arrives at the bar where she used to come with Jonine. She sits at the bar and gloomily drinks a beer. The watch on her wrist keeps beeping the midnight alarm, yet she ignores it. Her arms keep itching, and the hairs seem to have grown out a little longer than normal. All of a sudden, she is approached by Otto, who was watching her for a while. He tells her to go out for a smoke. Her heart skips a beat as her eyes unexpectedly find Jonine and Rick. Otto tries to grab her attention once more, saying they should ignore them and go out, but the girl refuses him. She forcefully puts the bottle on the counter and walks towards the couple. Heather then confronts Jonine, telling her that she cannot just pretend not to know her. Watching her vulnerable state, Jonine gets worried and asks if she is okay. Rick seems to notice Heather, and Jonine rushes to tell her to leave. The girl, however, refuses to heed her advice. Her defiance only earns her a forcible escort from Rick. Everyone else stays back except Rick and his two friends, who bully Heather outside. Pushed to her limits by Rick's aggression, the woman spits back. She calls him a coward for being aggressive with his girlfriend. It doesn't make him look tough, but rather pathetic. Fueled by a simmering anger, Heather questions his masculinity, provoking him to the point of no return. In a horrifying twist, Rick loses control, unleashing a brutal on Heather with a cue stick. He tells his other two friends to go in and lock the door until he knocks, and begins assaulting Heather. As the moon ascends to its full glory, casting an eerie light upon the scene, Heather undergoes a chilling transformation. All of a sudden, hairs start to rapidly grow all over her body, and her eyes change color. With a guttural roar, she finally morphs into a powerful wolf, her instincts sharpen from the taste of blood. With savage determination, she dispatches Rick, leaving behind a trail of carnage as she flees into the sanctuary of the nearby woods. In the meantime, Jonine stays inside the restroom, cowering in fear. She hears the toe-curling noise coming from outside, yet she does not dare leave. The following morning, Heather awakens in her room, her body and drenched in blood. Soon her mother Patty arrives and tends to her wounds with a mix of fear and concern. As soon as she is done, Patty, fearing for Heather's safety, delivers a stern warning. She tells her to flee their home, as it is no longer safe for her here. Later, the news of Rick's demise is plastered all over the television. The authorities conducted an experiment and concluded that it was a lone wolf that attacked the guy. Turns out, there were witnesses who saw a large dog flee the scene after the incident. They are not wrong. The police have even given out instructions on what to do if anyone happens to come in contact with the creature. In the wake of her mother's grim counsel and the events regarding the investigation, Heather grapples with a fateful decision. With resolve in her heart and uncertainty shrouding her future, she finally decides to leave the town behind. The movie ends with Heather boarding her car and embarking on a journey into the unknown, guided by nothing but the primal instincts coursing through her veins.